it's been a while since I posted on my channel, but me and Cobra and the people at the VR Grace Church decided we were going to do a series where we went over essentially each religion, worldly religion, and debunked why it's illogical. But I wanted to do a parallel on that to go a little bit more in depth on specifically why I don't like that religion, and why I don't accept it. Um, Anyways, I have Cobra and Varhill in the call with me. They may or may not speak, but anyways, I wanted to go over a couple of different things here. So first, I wanted to go over the Varna or the caste system. It's called Varna, but it's essentially the caste system. What you essentially have is you have Brahmins, right? Brahmins would be like priests or scholars. They're considered the highest. You have these guys. I'm not even going to attempt to fucking pronounce that, but they're essentially warriors or ruler caste, like cops, military, things like that. Then you have these people. These would be like merchants and farmers, and then you have the Shudras, which would be like laborers and servants, which would be essentially Dalits. They would be the lower caste people who would essentially, like carpenters and shit like that, right? Uh, Essentially, as you can see, it evolved into a rigid hereditary caste system where birth determined status, occupation, marriage, and social interaction, creating deep-seated inequality and discrimination, particularly against the untouchables Dalits outside the system, though modern reformers and law aim to counter caste-based injustice. Keep in mind here, the modern reformers and law aim to counter caste-based injustice. So what does that mean? The normal is that it is injustice and that anything that goes against this is actually considered reformation, but it's very much a consistency across India, specifically when Hindu controlled places where you have these four main castes, right? Um, so the original intent, right, of it is suggests that Varna was meant to reflect natural aptitudes and duties, not birth, right? However, over centuries, Varna became fixed by birth, restricting social mobility and creating hereditary hierarchy. So, essentially, what you have is the person who is, if I was to translate it into a Western sense, this would be like an actual representation of what we talk about when we say the rich stay rich, the poor stay poor, elites treating lower people like shit. This is essentially an entire system based around actually justifying treating certain people a certain way based off of their last name, based off of their caste, their riches, things like that. It's a very segregationist type of ideology that is baked into the society. Some people will say they will go to the outliers and they'll say, well, this school of thought actually doesn't like the well, again, the main consistency across India is that this is observed across India. Okay, across Hinduism, across India. This is not something that's like, oh, well, only 50%. No, like the whopping majority of people in India believe this. Okay, my problem with this is right. It's a way to justify. So, like here in America, right, when we see the kid get stuffed in a locker and spit on and bullied and put in the toilet and shit like that, we see that as wrong. Okay, and I'm talking from a temporal standpoint here. I'm not talking from explicitly from a hyper grace standpoint. I'm just talking from a human standpoint. In the West, we see that as wrong. In Eastern philosophy, specifically, I can't speak English today. Specifically, in Hinduism, they would say, well, if the person is born here, right, then the person that's born here is acting on divine will. So they would have to justify it. There wouldn't be any repercussions for these people hurting and possibly killing or driving these people to suicide or any of those things, right? So my original issue with this is that you're restricted to your caste, okay? And that branches out into multiple different areas. You're not allowed to marry, which will come up here in some of the future things that I'm going to cover. You're not allowed to marry into other castes. You're not allowed to, talk to certain people. You're not allowed to eat with certain people. You're not allowed to use the same equipment. Sometimes you're not even allowed to use the same door, touch the same handles for different things. You're not supposed to look people's way. The police will they'll treat you a completely different way. They'll beat the shit out of you for even looking at certain people. This is my original like overarching problem with the caste system, is that it makes a clear distinction socially from a theological standpoint, which is based in something that is completely illogical, and there is no proof of any past life or karma. No person in the present life has any understanding of that, right? So that's my main issue with this, is that it's just a system based off of inequality. And my problem with Hindus is that when they hear Christianity, even the legalistic Christians, right? But just from a hyper grace Christian standpoint specifically, they have a problem with Christianity because our God came for the kind of people that their system tells them that they should despise and hate and spit on and kick and kill and treat like shit and refuse work and refuse the ability to eat. That's their problem. When they see Christianity, when they see Jesus, they see a reflection of their inaptitudes to give hope to people. There's no hope in Hinduism, right? It's continuous hell. It's people justifying vanity, you know, materialism and social hierarchies, and using that to oppress, you know, the lesser. And it's them seeking out or justifying these things, and those people seeking out, attempting to try salvation on a earth that is essentially condemned to hell, and that they contribute to it being hell for those people. So that's my essential problem with the caste system, right? Now, when we go over here, right, there's a reason why I typed this in. So honor killings. What are honor killings? Honor killings are essentially, it could be across multiple different things. Honor killings are not just for the girl who was raped in Hinduism, or, you know, it could be because you married into a different caste, which goes back over here. If somebody right here falls in love with somebody who's from right here, or somebody from right here falls in love with somebody who's from right here. Oftentimes the person who is in the lower caste, especially if it's a woman, is killed. Or if it's a man, you're killed and your body is buried somewhere in the woods or some shit. And the lower caste family whose child is killed, they often are mistreated, and they say, well, they go to the police and say, well, I can't find my child. The police are like, well, what happened? We don't know what happened. And even if they do find out what happened, because these people are considered higher in the society, oftentimes have more money, they'll essentially just ignore it altogether, right? So these families don't get justice, and the idea of essentially love marriages don't exist. This is part of the reason why everybody kind of knows the stereotype of arranged marriages in India. This is partly why. This is the caste system. This is why it exists. This is why a lot of their families try to prearrange marriages, because they try to get rid of the possibility of honor killings, and you stay within your caste, because in their eyes, God forbid somebody is born to a mother who is here and a father who is here. Even if they're born to a father who is here, they're going to be considered an outsider, and they're going to be considered here. And then on top of that, they're going to get held because of the fact their parents are from two different castes. But moving on, we also have the idea of honor killings of a girl's rape. So what happens is, a lot of times, what you'll notice, anybody who's on the internet, what you'll notice in India has one of the most prevalent radical feminism. It's like one of the most prevalent places for radical feminism in the world. Okay, that's for a reason. India is one of the most depraved societies when it comes to respecting women, and when it comes to essentially protecting them. So what'll happen is, you'll have a girl, right, who is sometimes even as low as 14, 15 years old. She gets raped by a entire gang of devout Hindu men, right? What will happen is, essentially, because that child is no longer considered pure, right, or is no longer considered marriageable because she's not a virgin anymore, a lot of times the mother, the father, the uncle, they'll get together and they'll hang the child from a tree in the middle of the town to show the rest of the town, hey, we got rid of this child. They're no longer a part of our family. You can't consider our family cursed anymore. We're not trying to marry her off. right? So it creates a series of injustice where Hinduism, even to an extent, sometimes like a lot of times it actually justifies things like rape towards, women, and it encourages objectification and shit like that towards people, and it has this really backwards understanding of where it's like everything is about dead works and appeasing society in a system that doesn't inherently have any justification outside of I want to appease these people, right? So here it says, yes, women and girls who have been raped can be victims of honor killings within communities where this practice occurs, as the focus is perceived dishonor to the family rather than the crime committed against the victim, right? Then here's the problem. It says here, honor killings are a cultural practice rooted in patriarchal customs, not specific to Hinduism as a religion, but do occur in Hindu communities in South Asia, particularly in rural areas of India. Okay, here's the problem with that. You do not really see honor killings in other places where this has happened. Perfect example, Goa, right? Goa is a place in India where there's a lot of what are they called? Malankara Christians. They're an Orthodox Christian sect, right? Don't agree with their gospel, but for all intents and purposes, I'm going to use the example here. In Goa, the essentially in Goa, there is essentially no honor killings. Okay, it's only in places in India where you see essentially Hinduism or Islam where you see honor killings happen, and there's a reason why. The tribalism of the caste system, the idea of dishonor in this daughter essentially not being pure anymore and not being able to be sold off is considered a dishonor. So, you know, they often get together as a family and they will kill this person. And a lot of times it's actually this disguised as suicide or an accident. And the police can't do anything. They're not going to be like, oh, well, we think that you killed this person. They're going to be like, oh, well, we don't know what happened. You know what I mean? That's the sad reality. Uh, so the thing is, it's a perceived dishonor, right? Any perceived dishonor. It doesn't have to be because of this. It could be because a man or a woman married into a lower caste out of love. They will kill their child because they believe that it's essentially wrong, right? So it's a perceived dishonor. Um, And in this case, a lot of the times, this is the reason why radical feminism is popping up in India so strong, is because the women are trying to radically go against a society that has this baked in theology, whether it be Hinduism or Islam, where they feel like they're not being protected at all. So they have to radically and forcefully go against this to protect themselves, which I understand. So in these cultures, in honor-based cultures, especially Hinduism is an honor-based culture. Obviously, if you have a caste system, obviously it's an honor-based culture. A woman being raped is often seen as having brought shame or disgrace to her family, regardless of her being a victim of a violent crime. And we see this a lot. I mean, if you go on Netflix or any place, I mean, I grew up watching Bollywood movies, so I understand Hinduism a lot more just from a cultural standpoint. But um, if you go on Netflix, you'll see there's plenty of movies talking about, uh, especially now, it's more common now, where they're trying to liberate via cinema, where they show the story of a woman who is either sold off into brothels or, a woman who is raped and then, there's an honor killing. That's a common theme in a lot of these movies, especially the movies that are based around rural villages where Hinduism is prevalent. So this is not like some offshoot thing, right? This is something that is very prevalent in this society. So I want to go on to the third thing because we talked about the caste system, we talked about honor killings. I'm just going over the main topics to go along with the video that we made on the main VR Grace channel of why I specifically go against Hinduism. There's some inconsistencies with the reincarnation in Hinduism, right? So essentially, you have some people who believe uh, there's a real experience from a lower truth, but there's also people who believe where the soul is part of God, essentially, right? So they believe that every soul is just a piece of God. And then there's some people who believe that you're just separate souls. So there's an inconsistency there, right? There's also some understand reincarnation as a simple one life cycle, right? And then some, right, as branching into multiple forms across different times and dimensions. This secondary one, the complex journey, is something that came up later as a rebuttal to the idea of what most people would have as an objection with reincarnation, which is, if there was a finite number of life on the planet, how did that randomly blossom into 7 billion people and even more animals? How did all these souls and things just magically, show up and multiply if there's only reincarnation, right? So my issue with this is that, one, there's a logical inconsistency with the number of life forms in reincarnation. There's an inconsistency with how reincarnation happens. Um, and then also, uh, the idea of reincarnation is that your karma in this life determines your karma in the next life. And the problem is that's used as a justification to why somebody is born in a different caste, right? So if you were born here, for example, or you were born here, for example, and in your past life, which you have absolutely no knowledge of, you did some bad things, you end up here, and they treat you like shit. And they use, oh, well, he must have had some bad things that he did in this life, so that's why he's here. And that's our justification for treating him like shit. And if this person who is here is treated like shit, like I said in the video with Cobra on VR Grace, if the Dalit child did some bad things here, they're going to use that as a justification to not allow his parents to work when he's born into a low caste family. And now that he's here, if his parents can't work, he can't feed himself. So what does he have to do? He has to resort to stealing to feed himself. If he resorts to stealing to feed himself here, now what happens? He gets reborn as some type of animal, usually a lowly animal like a pig or some kind of crazy shit like that. And then at that point, how does an animal get karma? How does an animal accumulate good karma? You can't. Because then we have to argue the consciousness of an animal to know the difference between good and evil, and you can't do that. So the system collapses on itself, right? But then not only that, outside of these three things, there's also just the concept of gods. Hinduism essentially believes that there's this resonant voice or resonant sound called Om that echoes throughout the universe. That's essentially what God is, and it manifests in different forms, whether it be Vishnu, Ramas, Krishna, etc. Right? We have, unlike any other religion, we have absolutely no sources outside of Hindu sources that any of these gods ever came into flesh or existed. I need people to understand that Hinduism is less of a religion and more so a mythological philosophy, like mixed into a way of life, than it is uh, a religion that has any sort of historical backing. The only historical backing this has is that there's people who continued to add more and more and more and more and more to the text over time. Okay, like for example, there's a specific sect of Hinduism. I believe it's called Yananda, but it's a specific sect of Hinduism. When Christianity came out, they realized the inconsistencies in Hinduism. They realized how inhumane it was, so they adopted Christianity's beliefs. Not that Jesus was God, but they adopted some of his teachings, and they used those teachings to try and say, well, actually, Jesus was actually taught here by Hindus here in India before he went to the Middle East, and they confused him for being God, right? They adopted that belief after they heard about Christianity, way later. So the historical context of Hinduism is that it's literally just a bunch of people coming together over a series of, hundreds, thousands of years, adding on more and more shit. There's no recollection outside of this text of these gods or these people that they reference being real, right? There is a consistency across times that they adopt beliefs from various different places and try to infuse it into their religion to make it make sense over a long period of time, right? So when Christianity comes into India, they say, oh, well, they have to, because if they don't, then it's going to be Hinduism versus Christianity. So they try to adopt some of Christianity into Hinduism to try and make it seem like it's consistent. So over time, you essentially have Hinduism with no actual historical context or sources or backing itself, adopting the beliefs of surrounding religions that it believes that it competes with to justify it. So honestly, and I was just talking to Var and Cobra about this. I think Hinduism, in my opinion, is one of the closest representations to the type of Judaism that Jesus was dealing with back then, because they had essentially what was a caste system, certain people that they wouldn't touch, they wouldn't eat with. They had certain people that they justified, you know, they justified it with law. These people justify it with karma and rebirths. You know, you have honor killings, right? People marrying into different places, you know, honor killings for girls being raped. I mean, we have that with the woman that was accused of adultery, right? And Jesus stood in front of her and said, "Which one of you is without sin?" The issue with Hinduism is that it offers no hope for the lowly. It offers no hope for your humanity. Your humanity inevitably says, I have fallacies. I can't do this on my own. I'm not perfect. Christianity answers the inherent paradox of what the human condition is, which is that you cannot do anything on your own, that you're not a good person, that you have no hope if you have to do anything on your own. It answers the paradox that the realization that we have that the world is a corrupt place and it is essentially a living hell. Christianity essentially shows you that there is no way of earning anything good that actually offers you hope here on earth. There is no salvation on earth. There has to be something better. And to the Hindu child that is going through something, to the you know, the child that is the victim of honor killing, you know what I mean? The person who is the victim of the lower caste. The reason why Hindus have such an issue with Christianity specifically, and why there's multiple videos you can find online of them viciously attacking Christianity, is because it offers hope, and it disrupts the power and system that they have that allows them to oppress other people and to do things like this, which works in their favor. This is inherently a religion of blasphemy, dead works, power structures and cycles, the rich stay rich, the poor stay poor, justification of abuse, and essentially vanity. So, anyways, this is my video on Hinduism, why I reject it. This is a little bit going more so in depth. I don't know if this was confusing, but it's a video of me going more in depth on why I reject Hinduism, some of the issues that I can get in more specifically about why I think it just logically isn't consistent. Why, even from, you know, I'm not a legalist, but since Hinduism is a legalistic religion inherently, I can judge it by its own legalistic standard, right? I could show you why it doesn't even meet its own standard. I could show you why there's no historical consistency, why there's no backing, why it's oppressive, why it's ridiculous. And this is my little breakdown of why I personally reject Hinduism. Pretty soon, I think we're going to be releasing videos more on other religions, and then I'll make my little videos on those religions as well.